Hi guys. Yeah, got a new vise, man. So my other vices are Harbor Freight vices, and they are cast iron. This vise is cast steel, so it's a little bit stronger than the cast iron ones, and the construction of it is a little bit stronger as well. It's a 4-inch vise, and it's got about a 4.5-inch opening, I do believe. Let's see what the safe opening is, about 4 inches. And it's pretty good. Just a little bit of play, but I think I could create brass shims, throw them in there. But I like it. It's pretty sturdy. It's very geometric. These things line up nice and smooth and flat. And the action is pretty smooth as well. I'll probably grease it up on the inside a bit more. But it was only 63 bucks. That's not bad. Eventually, I would like to get a nice forged steel vise, but those cost a lot more than this, and I don't have the budget for that. I have procured a nice 90-degree magnetic bending brake. These things are very hard to find. A couple companies make them, and they are all out of stock. I wanted to get the Grizzly one. That was out of stock. I ended up getting this one from Eastwood. I think they're probably all from the same Chinese manufacturer. They just put their names on them. But let's try this out. It's already kind of bent, and we're going to hopefully finish the bend. I need to do a 90-degree bend out of it, so let's go. Oh, this thing is rad. I like it. Do it too much, I'll probably mess the metal up, but it looks like it's a nice 90. I can see that it's sitting flush against the inside there. So let's see what it did. Ooh, probably needs to go a little bit more. That's not as 90 as I would like it. Get a little bit more of a bendy bend. Looking good so far though. Not as aggressive as a bend either, but again, I think this is probably intended for much thicker metal. The thickness of metal that I'm going with, I might need a little bit more of a hobby application. But once you specialize your tool, you go for something that's specifically hobby, it's going to cost you a lot more, just because it's going to be a micro tool and probably a little bit better quality. But let's see. I think the harder I push this in here, the more of that aggressive angle I'm going to get out of it. So just keep tinkering with it. Yeah, it's getting a little better. It's a little closer to a 90. Push it in there more. It came out cool. So the other method that I can do to finish cutting this, making this angled out, is to put it in the vise and then smash it down with a brass hammer. But I don't have a brass hammer big enough to handle this neatly, so for right now it's just going to stay like that. But I think the end of the week I'll procure a brass hammer. So I'm going to continue bending out the metal and getting ready to rock and roll on this Doza blade. I'm going to try this again. It stuck to one side. It did not stick to the other. Figure out. Turn the heat down a bit. Not that cool. I don't think it did anything positive. Alright, I'm going to try this again. This time I used smaller pieces of this solder. I can't... Excuse me, cat. I don't care. Don't listen to her. She's lying. I used a little bit smaller pieces of this. I can't remember what the compound of this solder is, but I do believe it's got a higher zinc content to it, and requires higher heat. So by using the big amounts that I did on the other side, I think I kind of screwed myself. It did still connect, it just left these nasty gobs because I wasn't able to completely thin the material out. So I put a lot smaller pieces here, so I'm going to try it again and see if I can get the right combo. The pieces of aluminum that I'm using to support this are holding plenty of heat, so I don't think they're sapping too much heat from the metal, and plus it's just a small strip running down the middle. So we're going to give it another go here and see if we can get a little bit better results. If not, try something else. So that side worked great. So I wonder what I did differently. Maybe I'm not keeping the heat even, or maybe I'm getting it too hot. I don't know. So that side worked out really well. It spread nice and even. This side, not so much. So I wonder if maybe I didn't apply the heat even enough. I'll let it cool and we'll see how it did. Alright, so I think I'm beginning to figure out what I'm doing. While I was heating this side, I was distributing a nice even heat to this side. So as soon as I brought this over, it brought it up to the actual temperature that it needed to melt it out. And I think I was maybe giving it too much heat on this side, so much so that it wouldn't allow it to flow, and maybe I burned off the flux too quickly. I don't know. I reapplied a little bit of flux. There's still the same amount of solder around the outside, so I'm going to come in with a lower heat and just evenly spread it from there to there to see if I can get a connection with that solder. I may have to grind the solder off and start over, but I suspect that might be what's going on. I'm sure those of you who are really good at soldering are probably yelling at the screen right now, telling me what it is, but I can't hear you. Alright, so what I'm going to do is wash all the flux off, grind this solder off of here, and give that side a second go. There's something I didn't realize when this was pinned or sitting on the board. There was the slightest gap between this piece of metal and that one. It wasn't actually making a connection when it was sitting there. I realized that when I took it off and cleaned it and tried holding it together, there's some little points that aren't quite touching right. So I think that may have something to do with why this wasn't connecting. I still did a crap job of distributing my heat, but I think that may have had something to do with it. Alright, attempt number 392. Let's do it. what? It is fantastic. I'm gonna go rinse it off and see how well of a job it did. I don't think it's that good because I can't see solder on the inside of this. Wait, let's see. There. See? No solder on the inside, only on the outside. So I'm thinking it might just be a superficial one. Okay, so I finished soldering this. I fixed the solder that I goofed up, ground some of the excess stuff off, and now I'm ready to start creating the face plate of the blade. To curve it, just going to do pretty amateur simple technique using a round bar. I'm just going to apply pressure to it and curve it over the face of the bar. Don't need too much of a curve, just a little bit. It's kind of hard because it's such a short piece of material, and I don't have any other tools to do this with. So I don't need a lot of curve in this, just a little bit. Alright, so we got the initial curve in here. I ended up changing up my method a bit. I put a piece of this aluminum bar behind the metal so that I got a more clean contact, and then I put the steel pipe in front of it and then clamped it that way and gently bent it against the bar, which got me a pretty decent curve. I just kind of had to work my way around it. Not perfect, not ideal, but for this application I think it will work fine. So now that it sits in here, let's see what's my top is going to be that. I need to take and cut this back a little bit so that it sits a little farther in. Same thing with the bottom. Need to cut that back as well so it sits a little farther in. Alright, about 75% of the way done with the blade itself. As you can see, we have the rear supports all ground down. This plate has been soldered to the back. The face plate is on. I'm going to grind some of this back. I'm going to round the top of this out. Plus I got to punch a hole in the side of that. And then the bottom little, I don't even know what those are called, but those will be done out of styrene. I just did not feel like cutting the metal for that. And it's going to be a detail that is going to be not really visible, so I don't care if it's styrene. Not a whole lot left to do. Got to put this guard piece on back here. That's gonna cover where the shock absorbers contact, and then I also have to put in my little attachment point there. But before that, I'm gonna run some scores into this to make it look a little bit more realistic, because all of the full scale ones that I've seen have been like strips of steel on the back. And I got to put the cutting edge on, and then I'm going to detail the side up here, round that out a bit, put a little bit of a guard on there, and I think we're just about done. But it's coming along well. I'm happy with it. It's got some weight to it too. It's nice. It's got a very good solid feel. It's kind of heavy duty in there. I'll probably grind some of that solder back, and then obviously go around and clean up all that solder there. But it's come along good. I'm really pleased with it. It's getting push catty. We are making push cat. Alright, this should be the last solder for this blade, and possibly the last soldering for this project. Just putting on the loops, the attachment points for the little suspension system. Actually, it's not a suspension system, it's a shock absorbing system. Just gonna heat that up, and then I'll show you how the blade looks. Blade's not done, got a little bit more to do to that, but just wanted to show you guys the nutty system I had to come up with just to hold all this stuff in place. Working out pretty well. Some better lighting, you can see those 2 points where the little suspension, I keep calling it suspension suspends things. This isn't suspending anything. The shock absorber, then this is all going to go by grinding that out. This has got to get rounded off at the bottom. Going to create some detail on the sides here, punch a hole in there. We're almost there, boys and girls, but it's looking good. Alright, time to start throwing the finishing touches on here. Did a little bit more work. Kind of cut the sides back and prep the front for application of the edge guard. Also finished up the bottom and got some stuff welded or soldered onto the back. Now I'm going to put the groove lines in. Basically, when you look at the full scale version of these, there is a series of bars of metal going across the back. I'm not actually going to solder bars of brass onto there. I'm just going to cut lines into it to give the appearance that they are already there. Then a few more details to do on this bad boy, and it will be time to put the finishing touches on the shock system. So let's get this thing finished. The reason I'm doing this after the fact is because I wasn't sure if I was going to be soldering anything over where these are going, and I was worried that if I did, that the solder would flow into the groove and fill it and make it so I'd have to go back in and scrape stuff out again. So I'm doing it last, which is kind of a pain in the butt now because I have to work around all my attachment points, but it's alright. I don't mind. right, the blade is done. So I decided that I wasn't happy with the difference in distance on the side. So I decided to cut about 1.5 millimeters out of that. So it looks a little bit more evened up. But the blade is done. I added some more detail to this as well. Just a little bit of styrene back there to look like a bit of reinforcement. And then those little bolts, simulated bolts that went in there. So the last thing to do on this, and I'm weighing out whether I'm going to actually do bump stops for this or not. We'll get to that. But the last thing to do is the shocks. We've been talking about this a lot, and I haven't been doing much. So let's work out the components that we're going to use first. I have these miniature bolts here, springs, donor hydraulic cylinders, and then brass tubing. I have two different sizes here. One is a 2.5 millimeter and one is a 2 millimeter. So let's get cracking on this. I'm going to measure out my distance here. How much of it I'm actually going to need. Give you guys a better camera. Now in its resting position, I don't want it to be completely parallel. I want it to tilt forwards just a bit so that if it's in its full upright position, the blade isn't back too far. So I think right about there should do it. I'll mark it off. Get a grip, man! It's the only problem with using scrap is sometimes it's too small to be practical. But makes for a fun challenge. Alright, so now that portion of the component is done. It's the back of the piston. And then this will eventually get glued together later, but that's how I managed to make the whole entire thing. It will sit in there and attach to those points in there. So let's mock it up and see if it works, and then I will add the heat shrink to this. Alright, trying to get that pin in there was a royal pain in the tush. Mirror image. But it's in. Have a functioning function. It works quite well. Let's see if I get you guys a good angle here. Sometimes I'm the biggest moron I've ever met. I'm over here with this thing pinned together trying to put the pin in for this component with it put together. Steven, take it apart, pin it in, and then assemble it. Arrgh. Alright, let's see if this heat shrink idea is even going to work. Here's the heat shrink tubing. Just a little bit of it that I cut off some stock. Put it over this guy. All right, so functionally not exactly the best, and that's because this sits a little lower than that box. I could have done a little bit better job on my geometry when I set this up, but aesthetically it looks good. I like the fact that it has a boot around it. Just the chrome spring in there looks really cool, but it's not realistic at all. This is a little bit more aesthetically realistic because they have a boot that sits around the shock absorber that's in there, and it still does function. The boot actually adds a little bit of compression to this. Still not entirely sure if I want to put the bump stop in there, but I think I might put one in there just for looks, but it won't actually be functional. This doesn't, because of the heat shrink tubing, won't go back far enough to hit. But it looks like the tubing is staying in place. It's not slipping off of the spring at all. So yeah, I think I'll use it. It's one of those things that at the very last minute, if I don't like the way it looks once it's all painted up, I can veto it, take it out, and just leave the spring, but otherwise it looks pretty good. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this episode. We should have probably about 2 more episodes left. Just got to finish some odds and ends, little bits to tie it together, a little bracket to hold the cab together. Then I need to do the lights and hydraulic hoses, so that will all be in the next episode. And then the very last episode will be priming, painting, and assembling the model, and then we're done. So probably about 2 more episodes, and then moving on to the next project. Thanks for watching, guys. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Thumbs up if you will, and we'll see you next time. Adios.